I made a video the other day talking about some of the things I'd learned from living in the UK over the past 20 years. Now, if you haven't seen that video, I'll leave a link to that video down in the description box below. Today, what I want to talk about is the affordability, or rather, shall I say, the unaffordability of living here in the UK. So having a chat regarding the cost of living in the UK will be really helpful for you, because basically I think looking at this, it can really help you to make better decisions when it comes to, the salary amounts that you should be thinking of going for, the location in the UK that you should be looking of living in, and also just generally any other things that may actually affect your cost of living and your lifestyle here in the UK. Now, to start with, your cost of living will generally vary depending on which part of the UK you actually decide to live. And also your cost of living will vary from time to time, due to factors like obviously rising cost of inflation, and also you may be, deciding to relocate from one city to the next, or, moving jobs and things like that. So on a yearly basis, or at least on a timely basis, it will definitely change from time to time. And I think it's very important to be aware of what sort of factors can actually really influence that if you are looking to actually come here to the UK. Now, to start with, the average salary in the UK, okay, so this is for someone who works on a full-time basis, okay, and maybe in a permanent role, for instance, in 2022 was £33,000 per year. And with London being the city which has the highest average salary at about £41,866 per year, if you look closely, once you get out of London, most of the cities actually have an average salary of roughly £30,000 per year. So this means that unless you're actually working in London, you can expect that your average take-home salary on a monthly basis, this is net take home, would come anywhere in around the £2,000 region. Okay, obviously it really depends on what your role is, your experience, and the general company that you obviously get the job with. With respect to housing here in the UK, you can either have a mortgage or you can be someone who's basically renting a property. Currently, as it stands, mortgage costs are set to rise to about £1,000 on a monthly basis from about £750, which is where they currently were. So now at this point, you might be thinking, Tess, I don't have a mortgage. Why should I be bothered? The reason I'm telling you this is irrespective of whether or not you have a mortgage, the fact that the supply and demand with respect to UK housing basically means that there is far more demand than there is supply of houses here in the UK, means that the average monthly rent that you would expect to pay would still be pretty high. For those of you who have been following the UK news closely, you know that there's been a dramatic rise in the interest rates recently. This rise in interest rate is not just going to affect those who have mortgages, it will also affect those who are looking to rent properties. And that includes those who are coming from abroad who are looking to rent properties here. Because basically, in effect, the landlord will simply pass on that extra charge in interest rates over to those who are looking to rent that property. So rise in interest rate coupled with the supply and demand issues here in the UK with regards to UK housing means that the average cost of living when it comes to your property cost will come anywhere close to the £1,000 mark. So really, when it comes down to it, whether or not you're on a mortgage or you're renting, you are still going to have to budget somewhere around the £1,000 mark, okay, to pay your rent on a monthly basis. Obviously, this isn't final. It does depend mostly on whereabouts in the UK you choose to live, and obviously how big of a property you choose to stay in. Now, with respect to utilities, which is things like your gas, your electric, and your water bills, for instance, this will really depend on how much you're actually using, okay, on a monthly basis. A lot of people will often pay by direct debit, or sometimes they pay on a monthly basis. Sometimes it can also really depend on who your actual provider is, okay? Now, in my case, my utility bill on a monthly basis currently stands anywhere at around £160 per month, roughly, You know, it obviously depends on how much of the utilities actually gets used on a monthly basis, and this is for both gas and electric, and that's for a 2-bedroom semi-detached property. Okay, so obviously if the property was much smaller, then the utility cost would be lower. And for water, we pay about £20 thereabouts per month, and the cost of the utilities will obviously vary heavily depending on how many people actually live in the property, you know, how much of the utilities they're using on a day-to-day basis, and again how big the property actually is. So like I mentioned before, you know, the size of the property will really determine a lot of how much you pay. So the next thing to consider is your council tax. Now, your council tax needs to be paid whether or not you're actually renting or you have a mortgage on that property. Now, again, the amount that you actually pay on your council tax will heavily depend on the type of property it is that you're actually renting or you have a mortgage on, and indeed the location in which that particular property is. So where I live, and for the type of property that I live in, I pay roughly about £120 per month. Okay, so next is food bills. Now, food bills again really depends on how much you eat. Okay, so if you're like me and you like to eat a lot, then obviously your food bills on a monthly basis will be significantly higher. And if you rely on food produce that is not actually grown in the UK, then you can expect that your food bills will be significantly higher just because of the shipping costs of having to bring those native foods from another country into the UK. So typically Nigerian foodstuffs here in the UK will cost far more for me on a monthly basis than say non-Nigerian foodstuffs and, you know, buying British foods, for instance. So roughly currently as it stands, food bills will be anywhere from 150 to maybe £200 per month, or sometimes slightly higher than that. I can't really give a rough estimate. It really just depends on how much I consume in that particular month or in that particular week, for instance. It tends to vary from time to time. So the next cost you want to think about is your mobile phone. Okay, so I think a lot of people tend to forget about this, but basically when you're in the UK, with your mobile phone, you can either be on what is called a SIM-only contract, or some people also tend to buy their phone outright, in which case they don't have to deal with anything on a contractual basis. Maybe they just buy data on a monthly basis, which would generally be cheaper. For instance, I actually bought my phone outrightly, so I have my phone on a SIM-only contract where I pay for the data I use on a monthly basis, and that comes in at around £14 per month roughly. Now, if you chose to actually get your phone on a contractual basis, this will vary depending on the type of phone, you know, the quality of the phone, and again what particular mobile provider that you choose to take your mobile phone contract with. So you can expect to pay anywhere in the region from maybe £14 per month right up until even £50 per month, depending on whether or not you choose a SIM only contract or indeed you choose a contract where you are paying for both the phone and also the data that you're using on a monthly basis. Hopefully that makes sense, but if you have any question regarding that, then do be sure to ask me some questions down in the description box below. There are also a lot of mobile phone providers that a lot of people tend to go with. I can leave them down in the description box below so you can have a look to see which ones you might be interested in, and basically just kind of help you in making a decision as to what might work for you if and when you get to the UK and you're thinking of who the best mobile phone provider to go with is. Next up is TV license. Now, if you want to watch live TV, then you do have to purchase a license in order to do so. Now, the cost of TV license currently stands at about £159 for the year. Okay, so this equates to roughly £13 per month on a monthly basis. You can obviously choose to pay your TV license in one go, okay, in one lump sum, or you can split it and pay it on a monthly basis if you choose to do so. The next thing I want to talk about is obviously your travel costs, because sometimes people tend to actually forget this. Okay, unless you're going to be sitting at home all day, which you probably won't, you are going to need to travel. And for those of you who intend on staying in London, a lot of people who tend to stay in London generally will tend to opt to just use, you know, the trains mostly and the buses, because London actually has very good modes of transportation. Now, if you're going to stay outside of London, a lot of people outside of London heavily rely on having cars to get about, okay? Just because living outside London, the transportation connectivity is not quite the same compared to being in London. It really depends on whereabouts you choose to live. But in my opinion, in my experience, once you get out of London, you really need to make sure that you have your own car. Now, what does this mean? It means that if you're going to have a car, you need to budget for, you know, your driving license. You need to budget for the cost of the car. You need to budget for your car insurance. You need to budget for how much your fuel costs will be on a monthly basis, you know, your MOT, your car tax, etc. I can do a whole separate video on all the things you need to think about when you're actually looking to, you know, own a car here in the UK, because there's actually a lot of things to consider when you're coming from outside the UK and you're looking to drive, and you're probably not aware of all the costs that comes with being a car owner here in the UK. So it's much more simple if you actually don't have a car. Again, the cost here will really vary depending on whether or not you own the car and also what type of car it is. The fuel cost that you use on a monthly basis will vary depending on, you know, are you someone who works from home majority of the time, or do you rely on actually having to drive to the office every single day? How far is your commute going to be? If you're in London, again, the amount you're going to pay on the tube, you know, and using the trains will really be dependent on how far it is you have to travel. Since London's transportation system is split up in different zones, okay, usually zone 1 to 6 is what they call kind of the inner London areas, which is where most people tend to do their activities. Now, if you're going to be traveling, you know, much further within these zones, so say from zone 1 to 6, the amount you will pay on transportation costs will be way more than someone who's only traveling either within the same zone, like within zone 1, or traveling from zone 1 to 2 or 5 to 6. So the further across London you have to get to, the more your transportation costs will generally be. So it's something to bear in mind. Definitely when you are looking for a house to rent, when you first come, you have to take into consideration how close are you living to the tube station, for instance. How far is your place of work going to be, and how is that going to impact the transportation costs that you will have to pay for when indeed it comes to the time to going into work on a regular basis. So hopefully that's been really helpful for you guys. I have made a video here telling you some of the things you need to consider when it comes to buying versus renting a house here in the UK as an immigrant. So you might want to make sure you watch this video to learn some more information regarding property and how it works here in the UK. Until the next time, I'll see you in my next video.